afternoon, everybody. I'm Shervin Taimuri, and I'll be hosting today's CIM Vancouver session. It's about developing a project as a junior mining company, and I'm very pleased to have Mr. Derek White, CEO of Ascot Resources, and some of his team members, senior team members, in here with us. So I'll give a quick background on Mr. White, but before that, I'll just do a quick CIM Vancouver scroller, and then after that, we go through his presentation. And during the presentation, I ask everybody not to ask any questions. Just send the messages and questions to myself or to ask us team members, and after that, we can address those questions one after another. We expect the presentation to be about 30 minutes, Derek?
Yeah.
Yes,
30 minutes, yeah.
And then we have plenty of time to ask those questions right after that. So without further ado, thanks for coming. Do a quick safety share here. If anybody wants to do a quick safety share, please go ahead. If not, I'll just do a quick one. We are developing some mines right now, and we had a question on, do we need to have separate detonators magazines and blasting magazines separate underground? And some of the members answered yes, we do, and some of the members didn't. But essentially, what we had to go look at the code, and the answer was very easy. It was you had to have them separate, but it seems like it's getting a little, it's getting dusty with some of the team members. So you wanted to have that chat with everybody and saying just start looking at the BC mining code. If it's a good review, it's a good reading to have. So that's my not very safe to share, but it is essentially just look at the BC code. Sometimes it's always good to refresh your memory with all the regulations. So that was a very brief safety share. If anybody else wants to do that, please go ahead. I'll start the presentation. Some told me that I have to have it in a full presentation mode, so I will do that. And let's get this started. So the next thing is also on the CIM magazine is sorry, just it moved. Please renew your CIM national membership and your CIM Vancouver membership at the same time, if possible. It's always great to have you guys have your membership up to date, your address, everything, and we'll appreciate it. CIM Vancouver. And upcoming event, the CIM Virtual Symposium. it jumps on me. CIM Virtual Symposium is May 3rd to 6th, 2021. It's all about resilient and thriving in this changing world and challenging world, I would say. I would add. So please join in and please register for the Virtual Symposium. Always good to stay connected with our LinkedIn CIM Vancouver, and keep track of your industry news and CIM events, and keep connect with members. Hopefully at some point this year, we will all connect in real world, and we will all have, we'll all remember each other, I would say. And featured event sponsors is one of our sponsors is Bedrock Services, the expertise they can build on. They are one of our great sponsors at the gold level in CIM Vancouver. AMC Consultants, Mine Smarter, and I'm very happy to have them as our sponsors. Merit Consultants International, another great sponsors for us, and they are a division of cementation, so we will be glad to have them always as our sponsors. Pan American Silver, amazing. They're also our silver sponsors, so it's good to have them. And SLR RPA, they are always been a sponsor. I'm pleased to have Mr. Derek White as Ascot Resources joining us. He has more than 30 years of experience in the mining and metals industry, and he holds an undergraduate geological degree. He's from UBC, so I'm assuming Derek is of ex-GeoRocks member as myself. and he's also a chartered accountant. Prior to joining Ascot, he was principal of Traxys Capital Partners and a private equity firm specializing in mining and mineral resources. And he has been involved with KGHM International from 2012 to 2015. He has several executive positions, including Quadra, FNX as well. So, and he has always been with BHP and BHP and Impala Platinums in the past. So it's a great honor to have him as our speaker today. And I will pass the presentation to Derek to talk about his project at Ascot and Premier Gold Mines and Red Mountain projects in the Golden Triangle in BC with us. So
thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a brief introduction, but I'm sure most of the audience always are knowing your your presence in the industry and your contribution to the industry. So please start with your presentation.
Sherman, thanks very much for having us. And
Absolutely.
I think I'm sure a lot of people on the CIM know a lot about building mines, and I've certainly been involved in building and operating a lot of mines in my career. But we wanted to try and give a little bit of a perspective of what it's like for a junior mining company and a smaller company to build a project in British Columbia. And we certainly also welcome all the students who are on the call. It was many years ago, but I do remember being a student in GeoRocks at UBC many years ago, and spending a lot of time in the mining building as well. So I know things do change, and it may be online right now, but certainly remember that experience. So welcome to all the students. So I'll just flip a little bit and walk a little bit through the company's background, and then get into what we're actually trying to do with the project. So like many mining companies in British Columbia, Ascot had started out as a junior exploration company. And it was really focused on doing earlier stage exploration in an area around Stewart, British Columbia, in the southern part of the Golden Triangle. And a number of people that had been with me working in Quadra FNX time were approached by the shareholders of the company and asked us, would you be interested in having a look at this project? And we're not really miners per se, we're more on the geology and exploration side, and would you guys have a look at doing it? And John Kiernan, who's on this call with me, we went up to the site and had a look at it, and we were interested in the idea of refurbishing an existing mine site, and some of the advantages and also challenges that brings. In the Golden Triangle, although it's a prolific belt of very impressive grades and potential deposits, it really only has two operating mines today. One, the Brucejack mine, which was built in 2017 by Pretium, and the Red Chris mine, which is now owned by Newcrest. And you may ask, well, if there's a lot of companies that are active in the Golden Triangle, why aren't there more mines here? Why don't we see more operating mines in this part of British Columbia? And there's a lot of different challenges for the Golden Triangle, as there is for other parts of British Columbia. One is being that it's pretty remote. You have a lot of mountains and pretty costly infrastructure to build. And the time frame for bidding in that infrastructure and dealing with some of the permitting requirements that we have in British Columbia takes a lot of time. And certainly not just for Ascot, but we'd like to see more mines built in British Columbia, and trying to revive our mining industry. So Ascot came together in really for the new management team at the beginning of 2018, and we really tried to focus on some things that are a little different that you would see in a smaller company. And many of the people in Ascot have worked in large companies and also in small companies. And I think the first thing that I would say is that when you're developing and trying to bring in an operation in a smaller company, you just have less resources, less financial resources, and less capacity than you would have in a bigger organization. And so you have to be willing to think outside the box. You have to use whatever experience you have, and sometimes you have to be willing to take a little more risk to try and adjust the challenges. And it's really important that you have a culture of trying to do that. I think the second thing is you try to work with what you have. And so in a case where you've got infrastructure in place, you try to utilize that existing infrastructure to the extent you possibly can to try and reduce your capital costs and your time frame for construction and construction execution risk. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, in British Columbia, we're an unusual province in the sense that we have, roughly speaking, 91 First Nations, but only 4 that have treaty rights. And so working with the First Nations and making sure that as a mining company, whether you're big or small, you do that in a mutually acceptable way. And you really partner with that First Nations. And in our case, we'll get into that a little bit more. So, and there's just some pictures of some of the team here. And I'd worked with most of these people in a past life, except for Eric Konigsman, who just joined us and recently retired from Tech Corporation. But had some experience at this mill because he removed the SAG mill to take it to the Pogo mine many years ago. And we're lucky to have him join us. And we really tried to refocus our company with experience with a lot of people that had different aspects of development or operations to bring the mine potentially back into production. You can see a picture here of the Golden Triangle, but I really wanted to talk a little bit about, we see a lot of junior exploration companies in the Golden Triangle and a few operators. And some things that we've learned over the years, and we started a similar type of situation in the Quadra days. So Quadra was a junior mining company starting from nothing and restarted one of BHP's mines in Nevada called the Robinson Mine in 2004. But really, it's about making choices and allocations, and you have to pick the right people. But you really have to make sure, as a small company, you focus on the best areas for your people to make value, because you just don't have a litany of consultants and many people inside your organization. So you have to choose wisely about how you're going to spend people's time. I think the other one is obviously, and there's many people in the CIM that come from, services and the consulting side, is you really want to pick consultants wisely. And a lot of that is about personal relationship. Sometimes it's not just about the name of the consulting group. It's really making sure that you have a trust factor with how they're going to help you. And you've got to make sure that your expectations, your scopes, and designing whatever timeframes that you require are kind of well understood as you go into a project. Because you don't have the same financial, kind of fortitude as a large company, you have to be very careful with the money you spend. And so you want to make sure that you treat the capital as if it is your own. And I remember giving a speech to let's call it one of Canada's largest mining companies, and they had their top 50 people in the room, and I asked them, well, how many people know how much their house costs? And everyone put up their hand. And I said, how many people know how much you spent on your top 5 mines? And a few people put up their hands. And it's really making sure that you treat the capital that the shareholders have given you as if it's your own. And as a junior mining company, you really can't waste it. So you really have to know what you're going to do. In a renovation of an existing brownfield site, it's really important to make sure that you build what's critical for the operations from a technical perspective. And a lot of the things that are nice to have, you really have to focus on doing them kind of in a second step. And so it's getting what you need to do to get back into production, and then really trying to focus on the nice things afterwards. It's important, and the junior mine industry has kind of a tendency to kind of under promise and under deliver. But I think it's important to be clear about under promising and over delivering. If you say you're going to do something, make sure that you do it, and be with all the different challenges, live up to that. And I think the other thing, although this is true for all companies, is just making sure you always have a plan B. So there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be things that are going to slow down, and making sure that you have that plan B and you know how you're going to do things. Because you're a smaller group of people, making timely and informed decisions is important. And sometimes because you're dealing with less people, you can execute those decisions more quickly. And it's making sure you have buy-in and strong communication amongst the key team. And these are some things that have bode us well in the past, and we hope to try and implement as we go forward, is bringing this mine back into production for Ascot. So just quickly, to give a little bit of history of the Ascot site, Ascot was one of Canada's, well, actually North America's largest gold mines from about 1920 to 1955. and it was run as a high-grade underground mine that was owned by the Guggenheim family. And then it really didn't do very much until the mid-1980s when Westman came in and built a brand new open pit, new mill, and started to put in some infrastructure. And since 2017, when Brucejack came in place, there was a dam that was put by an insurance company on the property and a hydroelectric dam and power plant next to the mill. But the infrastructure that the mine has right now, or the mines that have, is the processing facility, which you see here, a number of side hill portal accesses to underground, and we've happened to have pretty good geotechnics, so there's a lot of stable underground areas that we can go into that are dewatered and ventilated. We have a port about 20-minute drive from where we are. We have a number of exploration drills. We have a tailings dam, a water treatment plant, and road access. And so when we're looking at trying to bring this back into production, we're focusing on what are the things that we have and what do we have to do to modernize those things to 2021 standards. And the strategy for us has been to focus on areas that are nearby and utilize the common infrastructure, which is ideally the processing plant of the mill. You can see a picture of the mill here, which was built in the 1990s, and the tailings dam in the foreground here. And the power plant is just off to the left here. But the strategy for us was to find deposits as quickly as we could, bring in mining reserves, and feed a common mill. And we, in developing the feasibility study and continuing to optimize that feasibility study in basic engineering, has been to understand what the right sequence of bringing that material to the mill. And so that sequence right now exists with us starting at the Big Missouri and Silver Coin mines and running those for a few years, and then bringing in Premier and Red Mountain. And the Red Mountain, although it's not too far away as the crow flies, because we have a mountain range in between it, we have to put in a temporary road, bring that material through the port of Stewart, and then back up to the mill. And back in the day, in the 1990s, the mill actually took material from as far away as the Snip mine, which is about 250 kilometers away by road. So the idea is a little bit like the Western Australian guys do. It's a hub and a spoke, and to try and make sure that we have enough diverse mining areas to feed the mill at 2,500 tons a day for a period of time by the mining sequence around the mine. On the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about what's happened to Ascot in the short time that it's been here. So with the new management team, from 2018 to about 2020, the strategy was for us because we started really with no high-grade resources. So through consolidating two of the mines that were close by, being the Red Mountain and Silver Coin mine, and developing resources, high-grade resources at Premier and Big Missouri, we were able to put a measured and indicated 7.3 million tons at a reasonably high grade, and also another 5.5 million tons of inferred at also a pretty strong grade. And we took that material and tried to develop out of the measured and indicated resources the feasibility study. And the economics in the feasibility study were quite robust. And they were robust largely because of the grade, but most importantly because of the low capital cost. And to give some kind of metric, this is a little bit smaller mill than Brucejack. But we're talking about roughly 1/9 of the cost of capital because a lot of the infrastructure has been already built. As we moved into last year, really the company focused on putting in the project financing to be ready to construct in the summer of 2021, getting ahead on the long lead time orders. And Eric and the team helped us with the group out of Montreal, ordering the SAG mill and the ball mill to be delivered to the mine at the end of June or early July of 2021. Continuing to find areas of gold mineralization that was close to underground infrastructure where we had marginal development to try and get into that. And then working with the Nisga'a First Nation and submitting our permit amendment process and making sure that we did the effects assessment on their treaty rights. As we go forward over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll be applying for an underground exploration license, and we'll start going underground at the Big Missouri area in the refurbishment and drilling areas, focusing on getting the permit amendment, which we're hoping to get this summer, and then starting the construction and refurbishment, which would take about 12 months from the middle of the summer to the middle of the summer 2022, and then starting production and continuing to advance and grow the production through the opportunities that we have at the site. When we look at that progression as a small company, it really happened in steps for us. And as a small company, you probably have a more compressed time frame, especially if you're trying to bring things into production than you would in a larger company. And you have to make sure that you don't skip, critical steps. But basically, in 2018 and 2019, what we did when we took over the ground or the land and this asset from Billiton, who was the former owner, we focused on getting the resources in place and putting in a long-term water treatment plant. We had a plant in place and making sure that we were bonded up and making sure that we could deal with long-term water treatment. And we slowly started to develop our relationship with the First Nations. And as we did that, we acquired some other assets. As I said, we acquired Silver Coin, which is a mine next to Big Missouri, and Red Mountain, which is about 12 miles as the crow flies to the southeast of where we are. And that kind of got us a resource of about 13 million tons of higher grade. At the time that Westman and Billiton were mining this, they were mining a lower grade and trying to run open pit material through the plant. And we were really focused on underground high grade resources. And we saw an opportunity where we had a lot of underground infrastructure already available, where we could expand or refurbish that and bring in multiple mines to feed a common mill to diversify any resource or continuity risk that we might have in some of the various stopes. And then in 2020, as I just said, really completing the project funding, getting the key lead time items in place, finalizing the permit amendment with the First Nations and with the BC regulators. And then as 2021 comes in, starting the early works, construction, refurbishment, and then ultimately getting into production. If we look at the feasibility study as a summary, we were able to take roughly 6.2, or so slightly under half of our resources into the mine plan. And when the QPs were working through this under our 43-101, we were of the understanding that there was 2 to 3 million tons that was very, very close to underground infrastructure that was already there, and that our ability to convert that from underground through an underground infill drilling program would obviously help our mine either extend its life or increase its throughput rate. High level, the mine ramps up to about 180,000 ounces a year. Its all-in cash costs are around $770 an ounce, and it had an IRR at a $1,400 gold price of around 51%. And that's a pretty good return for at $1,400 gold, and that's driven mostly by the grade and the low capital cost to get restarted. But as we know, I guess the test is in the execution of us and our ability to refurbish this and get that to work. We have obviously at today's metal prices a higher payback, and we're keen to take advantage of those prices and get ourselves back into operations. When we kind of take a big picture look at the mining plan, really when we're looking at multiple areas. Now in this part of the world, there are no underground shafts. Everything is side hill portal access. And generally, because we're mining from the top of a ridge down to about 300 meters, we tend to have dewatering that comes out on the portal access. So things above the kind of area where we have gravity bring water out, generally dewatered. Of the four mines being Big Missouri, Silver Coin, Premier, and Red Mountain, most of them had 3 or 3.5 by 3 meter access, and that's not really good enough for today's modern equipment. In the case of Red Mountain, we already have a portal at 5 by 5 meters, which was put there by Lac Minerals in the 1990s. But the job for us is to retrofit either by refurbishing existing portal areas or putting new portal areas to a 5 by 5 meter access. The mining methods, depending on the geometry of the deposits, is about 50% long hole, 35% undercut long hole, and about 15% room and pillar. And depending on how we work the development, the sequence is really to focus on the Big Missouri and Silver Coin, attach a ramp connection between those two, and then start to mine both of those areas to get our mining rate up as we start the operation. and then to work on the Silver Coin area, the Premier area and the Red Mountain area as we get into later years of the mine life. From a water perspective, one of the big differences that we're obviously seeing in today's mining world is controlling water and underground waste. And we have to be very careful and have a pretty detailed plan about controlling water to a common water treatment plant from either the tailings or mill or any of the underground portal areas, and making sure that any waste that's put outside, even if on a temporary basis, is on a aligned basis that we can control the water flow. And really, in today's world, controlling water in mining is really critical. And so just making sure that we have control spots to do that, we spent a lot of time working on that. One of the things that we've seen, both from the historical data at Premier, which mined, for 35 years, and as Brucejack has come into production over the last few years, is the variable nature of these deposits. And from a geology perspective, these tend to be hydrothermal, electrothermal deposits, epithermal deposits that tend to have coarse gold. And making sure that we have multiple phases to diversify any variation in that is important. Now, in a greenfield site, you don't have that because you're just developing in the first area. But because we're developed from multiple places, it's making sure we can diversify that risk. There is quite a lot of lateral development over the mine life, and we're at about 64,000 meters of lateral development, and about another 17,000 at the Red Mountain. And probably where we have a lot of that, and you can see that a little bit in this picture, is the spread out nature, because we tend to have flatter lying horizons in the Big Missouri, where we have more lateral development to access those areas. Now, part of that will be improved by additional infill drilling, where we'll be able to do less lateral development to convert ore. Our plan is to have a leased fleet of typical underground equipment, and we're working on that. And then ultimately, we may start with a contractor to be based out of Stewart. One of the advantages we have is that it's about a 25-minute drive from Stewart to the mine site. And we really would like to utilize the infrastructure and have people based in Stewart so that they can go home every night and they're not in a remote campsite. On optimizing some of these things, one of the things we're working at with Innovo Explo based out of Val-d'Or, Quebec, is the shallow angled mining system. And for those parts of our geometries that dip between 10 and roughly 45 degrees, we're looking at an approach which is a derivative of an Alimak mining, where effectively we put two rails on the hanging wall, and we have a hydraulic unit with a drill that basically drills up dip to about 100 meters. You remove the drill, and then you have a remote arm that has about a 15-meter radius on either side that flushes the material down to the bottom, and then you cross cut in and do that again. And there are some major advantages for us on this. Number one, in a typical footwall development that we would have to do, we'd have to do a lot more cross cuts to come in here. So that's definitely important, and reducing some of the dilution that we may get off the footwall is also important. The overall operating development cost to get and do this is quite important, and you're always protected where somebody's basically undercover 100% of the time. So we see an enhanced safety value on that. And we're working through the optimization of how to get that done. Eldorado's Lamaque mine has started implementing this, and there is another system that's a little bit similar at Torex called the Muckahi system. And really, with the two rail system, we get a lot more torque that we can utilize on that arm. So certainly Ascot is trying to adjust our mining methods to be, I would say, more effective in some of the geometries that we have to mine. On the mill side, this was a standard carbon and leach circuit mill. You can see here the primary crusher that came into a coarse ore stockpile that fed a ball mill and sag mill, and then went through the typical CIL process to produce a doré. They did run the mill at about 2850 in the past, and we're targeting 2,500 tons a day, which is about 2/3 of Brucejack's rate. And really, Billiton had sold the ball mill and the sag mill when they put this on care and maintenance. And so probably one of our key things is getting the crushing and grinding circuit back up to speed, and then building around that. And what's difficult and always tricky in it's like building an old house is how much do you need to modernize it to today, and how much are you willing to kind of deal with what's there in the past. And obviously certain things like some of the electrical and piping and stuff we're obviously going to have to put in new, and some of the tanks we'll use and some can't be used, and we're just trying to make sure that we optimize that to the best possible ability that we have. On the ball mill and sag mill, really what we're doing is we're fitting those back into the existing cradles that we have and trying to minimize the amount of foundational work we have to do. And we've decided, because of COVID, to address the fabrication of these being as much as we can inside of Canada. And we will have a variable speed motor on here on the sag mill that's interchangeable to allow us flexibility, both from a liner changeout perspective, but also as we get into harder ores, which we expect from Red Mountain. Typically, the premier ores we crush to a 75 micron, and somewhere between 45 and 50% are recovered in gravity. And in the Red Mountain, it's a harder ore that we need to crush down to a 25 micron, and we will need to put an isomill or high energy intensity mill in place to grind that down. And we're certainly trying to optimize the operating cost when we do that. Really on the approach, and you can see an isometric drawing of the mill here. It's making sure that we really do well on the key things, and crushing and grinding for us is critical. If we can't get the crushing and grinding right, because ultimately we see an opportunity to utilize this common infrastructure, not just for the deposits we see now, but for other deposits around this area. And if there is a change in hardness, we want to be able to deal with that. And making sure that we refurbish the equipment that we can, and we replace new what we have to replace new. And trying not to reinvent the wheel. And so typically in a greenfield site, engineers are always trying to optimize the scope and trying to change what is best from an operator's perspective. But to some level, the foundations are set here. The building is built, the layout is pretty well set, and so we'll optimize to the extent we can, but we will also try and use what we already have. And where we think we can make some small improvements in the recovery is especially in the gravity and the grinding side, and then on CIL and power consumption as we go forward. On the water treatment plant, the site has an existing water treatment plant which was built in the early 2000s and has operated fine. But in today's world, water treatment is such an important piece, and we're dealing with how do we treat the water that comes from the tailings dam, and how do we treat the water that comes from anywhere, in the underground or in any other runoff water that we have. And so in the plan that we have, we will build a new water treatment plant. It'll have roughly twice the capacity that we have in the past. We will put a clarifier in to remove sediment. We'll have an MBBR, or a moving bed bioreactor, to treat ammonia and nitrate. We will also put in a sulfide circuit, a high density filter, and really try to up the level of water treatment to make sure that we're not only in compliance with the regulators, but we do the right thing in terms of making sure that the water that we discharge from this site is of a high quality. And really the design here is to take one of the treatment ponds that we have, the lower treatment pond, infill that, effectively build the platforms on that, and put the new water treatment layout on top of that area. On the tailings dam, there was an existing tailings dam, and when Billiton had put this into closure, or temporary closure, they put a big spillway and they tried to reinforce the toe of the tailings dam. And with our consultants, we've been working on different options, and we've certainly gone through the best alternative technology on various opportunities for the tailings dam. The nice thing about the premier ore is it has very slow acid generation, and the kind of compromise that we've come to is to commingle Red Mountain and premier ores eventually, where the Red Mountain has a higher level of sulfides, and effectively segregate that in the tailings dam, and then ultimately cover this. We would do a center line lift where we reinforce the toe.
Sorry, I think we lost the presentation, so maybe we can share it again. Just lost it, yeah. So
okay. No problem. On the tailings dam, what we're trying to do is also try to use an existing tailings facility and reinforce it and make it better. And the way we hope to do that is by taking material off of a diversion channel that already exists and move that material to the base of the tailings dam so that we can work with a centerline lift. I know that people nowadays are concerned about centerline lifts, but I think from the engineering that we've done by reinforcing the toe of the tailings dam, we believe that that can work quite well, and obviously raising the height with the spillway as we go along. And that also allowed us to get rid of a sloughing problem that we had in the channel. So trying to use the existing materials that we have to make that fit what we consider to be a better tailings situation than we already have. With the First Nations, and I'll talk a little bit about that as a small company and how we deal. We're lucky we have a partner being the Nisga'a First Nation, and the Nisga'a First Nation is one of the few First Nations in British Columbia that has a treaty, and it lays out how proponents are going to address the issues that are necessary in terms of doing an effects assessment on their treaty. But Ascot's, with the help of the First Nation, with the Nisga'a First Nation, it's kind of come to an arrangement which is going to be interesting, and it probably hasn't been done in British Columbia before. And what we'll do is amend the existing permits that we have for the Mines Act and for the Environmental Management Act at Premier. And 2 years later, we'll upgrade and amend the environmental certificates that we have at Red Mountain. And at the very beginning, we will do an effects assessment on the treaty rights for both Red Mountain and Premier together. And so through a best alternative technology studies that we've done with the Nisga'a consultants on the tailings commingling and also on the water treatment, I think we were in a pretty good position with the regulators, and we've submitted our application, and hopefully that it'll go through screening and application review without too many hiccups. And for mining companies in British Columbia, whether they're large or small, we would really encourage people to reach out to the First Nations early in the process. And we started talking with the Nisga'a probably 2 years ago, and after our feasibility, we're having a call with them at least once a week to make sure that we had a good understanding of what was important to them and their consultants, what were the key concerns, and making sure that we'd address those issues before making a submission to the BC regulators. And we believe that behooves companies because they get a better understanding of what's important to the First Nations, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a social, cultural, and economic perspective. I think we'll hopefully, so far it's been a great experience for us, and hopefully as we go through the ultimate permit amendment process, and that will continue. On the exploration front, in this part of the world, really what we're looking at are areas, and we have 3 areas of the 25,000 hectares in the 2 land areas that we have. In the southern part of the Golden Triangle, there's really 2 types of geology that are looked at. One is the Inuk Formation in the Hazelton Group, which tends to be focused on these epithermal and hydrothermal systems. And what we see in these yellow dotted lines are regional faults. And typically off these regional faults, we have some other either listric faults or perpendicular structures, and they tend to be filled with these hydrothermal or epithermal fluids. And this is also what Bruce Jack is mining. And then this red dotted line represents a boundary, which is a different geology, which is more like SD Creek. And this is the Dilworth-Bowser Lake boundary. And we were fortunate in that we have both of these geologies basically on the Premier ground, and we tend to have more of the Inuk Formation on the other ground. And from our perspective, can you still
Derek,
see?
No, we've lost it again, Derek. I'm not sure why.
Sorry. Okay, I'll try again. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's back.
Okay. And so from our perspective, it's trying to look at the opportunities that are near mine. And so we have the Premier mine, the Silver Coin mine, and the Big Missouri mine. And from either underground or surface, we hope to drill things that are within 100 meters of the underground infrastructure. Even though those are not in our resources right now, we have enough base resources and reserves to get the mining going, but then to convert that day zone, the areas that are close to Silver Coin, and the Premier West zone in Premier. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have other opportunities that are not close to underground infrastructure. And along these trends, we tend to have flatter lying structures to the west of the Cascade Creek Fault, and we tend to have half bowl structures where they're steeper to the south and flatter to the north on the east side of the Cascade Creek. The area that's north of this contact is still early stage, and we've done some initial drilling and some geophysics, and Pretium, our neighbors to the east, are also doing that. And so we're certainly looking for those VMS style Estes Creek deposits, and that would continue to work on an early stage basis to continue to do that. So as a small company, our strategy is generally to try and get the mine up and running and produce cash flow, and then expand from that by a number of the opportunities on our ground or surrounding ground that makes sense to that mill infrastructure. On the resource side of it, really there's two things that we're working on in detail. So one is, and this is a kind of a high level cartoon, but where you see the reserves here in red and this infill that's close by where we have marginal development to go after that. Basically it's how do we drill? What's the most effective way that we can drill that? And one of the things that Lars is working on with our mine planning guys is running a algorithm to say what is the most effective and efficient way of drilling these areas to bring them into the reserve and into the mine plan. And the second thing that we're doing, and it's not necessarily because we're great explorers, but it is related to that, and I don't want to take anything away from our exploration team, but we were drilling a geotechnical hole for one of the adits that we were looking in this area west of the Premier mine, and we hit into some pretty good grade and some thick area, and our exploration team had gone back and put a drill platform here, and it's very close to where we're going to be putting in a new adit to go into the 609 zone, and it would behoove us to infill drill that and bring it into the mine plan because we're already building underground infrastructure there. And to some level, that's also true at Big Missouri. We stepped out about 300 meters to the west, put 3 platforms in, and had some very encouraging results, which showed a continuity and a potentially new mining area that was west of where the Big Missouri zone called the Day Zone. And so that'll be clearly a focus for us in the coming year. To give some idea of this, and this is sometimes where mining focused guys tend to miss it a little bit on the exploration side. These were where we see the 602 and the 609 were part of our reserves. We really didn't know very much what had gone past this road. And it's only because of that geotechnical hole and then additional platform that we clued into the idea that maybe the 609 could extend, and that we had an opportunity in this area close to the mill building for additional resources that could quickly come into the mine plan for limited development. And so that's certainly something that we're continuing to work on as we go into the 2021 field season. And similarly for Big Missouri, the same idea. The 2 horizons that we mined from the S1 pit, they seem to extend for about a 200-meter period. There's a fault in here, and then they seem to be rotated. We've picked up some kind of offset to the deep zone, and out of the page potentially something on the province zone. So certainly an opportunity for us on near mine, what I would call building more resources to extend the mine life of those 2 areas. So I know we're getting close to our time. I just would wrap up by saying, as a small company, you try to use the resources you have to try and most effectively focus people's time and capital. And it's not that big companies don't do that. It's just that it's more required. It's more of an absolute necessity for a smaller company. I think we've got the capital funding, and we're getting ready to execute the refurbishment of the mill. We're working on different mining methods and dealing with making sure we execute on the refurbishment and trying to optimize as much as we possibly can. We've gone through a long but good process with the Nisga'a First Nation and now the permit amendment to get the mine back into production. And we're still starting to build our team because we really like to see this as one of the next new gold mines in BC and start to see more mining activities in the Golden Triangle. So I'll stop there and just ask if there's questions from the floor.
Thanks very much, Derek. Please send me your questions, anybody in the audience, and I will relay that to Derek. One of the questions was, well, first of all, thank you very much for this thorough presentation. It's one of the very good ones that I have ever, I have seen lately. It's really detailed technically, and I think it's really geared for our audience. So it gives a good, very good overview, technical overview of the project, as well as the management overview. One of the questions was, what's the rationale behind starting mining at weak Missouri and silver coin instead of Premier close to the mill? Higher grade, more accessible,
yeah, so really, again, it comes down as a small company to what's your capital cost. And this really comes down to development. I mean, and this may turn out to be different, but for the reserves that we know, they're, we have to basically develop quite a bit farther into the side of the mountain. With Big Missouri, we're almost into ore within 50 to 100 meters of putting a ramp off an open pit. And so what we find, as a small company, one of the things we have to focus on is what's financeable for us on initial capital. And it's not that maybe with more work we could figure out some other opportunity, but in the feasibility study, the development cost of Premier is much, much greater than it is to get into mining. And so it's a little bit of just, our ability to get mining quickly is easier at Big Missouri and Silver Coin, even though we're facing a 6 kilometer haul down to that the mill area. And if in the Premier case we are able to convert some of the resources that are close to the portal, then we'll continue mining those as well. And we don't have to wait till year 3 to do that. So it's really development cost that's making that decision.
Excellent. And one more, thank you for that. One is, I guess one of the students has asked, Emmanuel has asked, what's the best way a junior engineer can get involved with the smaller mining companies? I have my own answers, but at the same time, I want your point of view as well on this.
Well, my kids are at, I can't, they're in engineering at UBC right now, and they get summer jobs and whatever. And I remember being a student, and in my time, we didn't really have the internet or whatever. So, the recruiters would come to campus and we'd try to get ourselves a summer job because we needed the money to pay for school. But at the end of the day, we also wanted to get the experience. And unfortunately, because of COVID, it's made that process a little more difficult. But, all of the team at Ascot knows what it's like to be a student, knows what it's like to go, gee, I've taken all these courses in school, but do I really know anything? Do I have any understanding of what's doing it? And, we've tried to support, not just UBC, but, UBC engineering and the different disciplines. And, for all the students, we've had some interesting ways of recruiting people. But, you can reach out to me or Christina. And even though I'm, you might think, oh, well, I don't really want to talk to the CEO. I know what exactly it's like to be in your shoes. And so, we're here to build a mine, and we need people and we need students, and we want people to be a part of this. And can't say we can employ everybody, but even if you talk to us, we know a lot of people in the industry. And so just don't be scared. So just reach out, and, we'll take the time to connect. And as things get better with COVID, hopefully we'll be able to meet in person. But on projects, and I also know that for a lot of the capstone style projects that are done, people want real data, or they want to have a real mining problem. And in a small company, we need your help. So we're more than happy to try and sponsor some of those things. So just the best way to do is build connection. And so what I would say is, don't be scared. Email us, and if you need to get a hold of me, just talk to Shervin, and he can forward my address, and we can get it on the mining side, on the metallurgical side, on the geology side, on the environmental side. Reach out.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I agree with you, and I also one addition would be just be very resourceful with your time. Like if somebody tasks you with a work, just don't pass the ball to them directly. Just do as much as you can, and with internet, with all the other studies that are out there, there's lots of reference material that you can refer to. So, and one other question that I had was, considering current market, how is your mandate with working with Canadian First or Made in Canada First mandate? Do you have something like that? Or
I think it's not even about Canada First. Ideally for us, we're looking for, how do we work with the community of Stewart and Terrace and Smithers? How do we support people in that part of the world? And one of the things that a lot of mines do in the Golden Triangle is they haul people from all over Canada, and you're flying them to Terrace, and then you're trucking them, and then you're supporting them. So we're trying to reach out to people that are in our local communities first. But certainly, especially with COVID, we're trying to deal with people inside of Canada, and Canada should be proud that it has a lot of excellent mining people across the way. They don't manufacture or do everything that we need, but to the extent we can, we're trying to work with that. And so I think what we would say is we're trying to work with local groups based where we can up in that part of the world. And then we're trying to work with people in British Columbia, and then we're trying to work inside Canada, and then whatever that goes from there.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit horses for courses, but obviously we want to try and work with local suppliers as best we can.
Absolutely. I'm seeing not many more questions. So I had a question myself, and is in terms of the mining method, why maybe that's there's a big debate here, but in terms of mining method, the SAM's mining method seems very innovative. The drift and field approach, has it been considered as well, or anything like that? Any other sort of shallow angle?
Yeah, and I don't know if John is on the phone, but John's our COO and a mining engineer who could probably talk your ear off on mining methods. But
and here, Derek, you want me to talk somebody's ear off?
Yeah, well, I'll make one comment and then we'll talk about it. And so what we're considering in the mining method is I think we're trying to look at it holistically for the size and dimensions and geometry of the deposit. And so, we have to take in access, development, whether it's a top sill or a bottom sill, or how often we have to go in, dilution that we're going to get inside of the orientation, and then just operating costs that we would look at in making that stope design. But I will hand over to John, and John,
very briefly, Derek.
Go ahead.
Just to answer Shervin's question there, we considered every combination of mining methods that we could think of, because I've had a lot of experience in very small narrow vein mines. I looked at shrinkage. I looked at that was historically done there. I've done resewing. And one of the methods is like a mechanized resewing, this inclined undercut, where you take the rock up from underneath, blast into the void. So we've looked at everything, and we've kind of settled into basically long hole where appropriate, inclined undercut in the odd shaped things that can become SAMs in the future, and room and pillar for the flatter areas, which is a method I worked many years in myself up at Nanisivik. So we looked at, as Derek said, cost and productivity and dilution, right? We considered all that. So we did have a very extensive.
So John, why don't you answer his question on drift and fill?
Oh, that's one of the methods we looked at, and it's very labor intensive, drift and fill, in my mind. So and that's just my an opinion. I've been involved in that, and it does work where it does. But after reviewing everything, including drift and fill and issues like that, we've come with methods we think work for us.
Yeah.
And other people may have a different opinion, but that's what it is.
Excellent. Yeah. No, thank you. No, I really like to see the new SAM's method here working as well. I mean, they're using it, I believe, in El Dorados, as you mentioned as well.
Yes, yes, at Lamaque. They're doing a test scope at Lamaque. Yeah. So it's pretty innovative. And as Derek alluded to earlier, it's similar to what Fred Stanford's doing on Torex with Mucka High, except the big difference here is that the SAM's method can pull from the side with the twin rails, whereas the Mucka High one is good for developing very steep ramps. SAM's can develop steep ramps, but can also mine. So we're looking at that right now in terms of optimization, and who knows, it might be a good study for somebody at UBC to do.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I can talk to you, John, on that. And
for sure.
Very bright and young mining minds on this project for you.
Oh, thanks, Shervin. I didn't know I had a bright and young mining mind.
Oh, he's not talking about you, John. He's talking about students at UBC. You're an old and wise mining mind, not a young and bright mining mind.
Thanks very much, gentlemen, and thank you very much for everybody. If nobody else has any questions, just quick questions on one of somebody else. Dimensions of typical long hole stope here. Just maybe John, if you have that handy, you can say that, and then I'll just send a general thank you to everybody if you have that handy. dimensions of the typical long hole?
Yeah, in terms of like the average long hole over the whole PGP site, and we use it in various places depending on the orientation, the average is about 4.2 meters wide.
Yeah.
And the typical stope's about 20 meters vertical type thing. So, say 20, 30 meters on strike, depending on the ore, right? Some places it's a lot shorter. And some of that is because we used indicated in the feasibility. We know there's inferred there. If we upgraded, we'll change the stope dimensions, but that's pretty typical.
Yeah. And do you guys use any sort of a skin pillar or diaphragm pillar or on this to hold the backfill? Or
currently now we don't have a lot of like longitudinal or transverse slopes that are abut each other, except at Red Mountain where we do have primary, secondary. But in most of our slopes now, they're fairly isolated compared to other slopes that we haven't done a lot of leaving pillars, but that'll come in more detailed design when we actually get underground and start seeing what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very good information. I learned some as well, and it's really good to have you, gentlemen, take time off of your busy schedule and present here to the Vancouver community, CIM Vancouver community. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon. And all the best wishes for the successful project in the next few years. I really like to see it coming and creating jobs in the Golden Triangle.
So we have no mineral processors in the group. There was no milling questions whatsoever.
I did not see much. I think, or maybe they have studied the feasibility study and it's just fully addressed.
Well, Eric, we won't leave it out. We'll ask you some questions offline afterwards. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for your time.
Be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.